Hello. Sorry, I was just getting a bit organised. We'll just let this run for. Just let the notifications get out there. Watch and see. Hopefully, we're not lagging. Welcome aboard. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from or watching from. It's always nice to get an idea, especially if you're new. That's always good. Let me get the profile up. There we go. Oh, look, we're going live on Twitter too. Naomi, hello. How are you? I don't know if you're a TikToker, Naomi, but I'm doing TikTok every morning now, and I'm having to, because it's for the youth. I'm being a bit more outrageous on my daily early bird reports, so that's pretty good fun. Okay, well, I think we might just get started. I'm probably going to be working on other things while we're going, and I'll keep looking for the comments. I'm trying to get some. I think were we talking about the Patreon and buy me a coffee and membership levels and all that, Naomi? I think we were. So yeah, I'm working on getting those going, and a wish list too, in case people want to help me replace the equipment that I flogged off over the pandemic to keep going. So yeah, that's where we're at. That's where we're at these days. All right, I'm going to be down there in the in the corner of the screen. So I'll be here if there's things you want to say or bring up. Just go for it, and I'll be just doing stuff in the background, but watching. So yes, and listening. I haven't listened back to this since I did the interview, and it hasn't been out in the podcast feed yet. So I'll probably rediscover a whole lot of things about Jack as we go. Jack's a cool cat. So let's go. Joe. And I called him Joe first time. Sorry about that. Just got it on the brain. All right.
I've been called worse things. It's fine. It's fine.
This is our pre-show chit-chat, I think. I was going to ask you a question, but I'll save it until we're officially going. And I don't usually stream in the evenings, so I don't know whether... what time is it over there? 4, did you say?
It's 10 a.m.
Oh,
right
10
now.
a.m. 10 a.m.
Which, usually I would have gone earlier, but it's like I would have been up at first thing in the morning to be like... And I feel like I've got to give myself at least an hour or two to get fully switched on before I'm going to give decent answers.
I'm just used to doing it any time, because talking to people from all over the world, I just go, just pick a time, I'll be right. I'm doing one actually at 3 a.m. in the morning with a guy from the States who but I'll tell you about that when we've finished up. All right, I'm going to put the video on for our countdown. Oh, it's only 30 seconds. No, it is a minute. Oh, and we're not muted. Oh, that's interesting. Usually it mutes us on the countdown.
Excellent picture choice. Excellent picture choice.
Yeah. Actually, I should have I think I've got the photo credit on there really, really small, but that was taken by one of the previous guests on the Bird Emergency.
Mm-hmm.
How many episodes are you up to now?
I'm coming up to episode 60. I think I've recorded about 55 of them, and so too many. I'm taking a break when we get to 60 to recollect and be.
And how regular are you? with it?
Usually about once a week, I try.
Oh, well done. Well
Yeah.
done. All right, here we go. It's the bird emergency. I'm Grant Williams. I'm a bird nerd. Let me just take the screen down. There we go. Oh, let's do that one because we were looking a bit monstrous there. Let's start that one again. It's the bird emergency. I'm a bird nerd. I'm Grant Williams. This is the bird emergency, as I just said. See, and and today we're talking bird adjacent. That's awful. Why? Oh, that was a horrible noise. I don't know where that came from. We're talking conservation and podcasts. So that's bird adjacent. So I reckon we can be forgiven. And if you're only a casual viewer in Australia of snippets from the BBC, 8 out of 10 cats and things like that, this is not Joe Lycett. This is Jack Baker. And Jack is the host of the Pangolin podcast and also Rezoo. But we'll talk about how it all fits together shortly. Welcome, Jack. Thanks for agreeing to talk conservation with me.
My pleasure. Absolute joy to be here. It's no problem at all.
Now, at 10 a.m. in the morning, your time. So let everyone know where you are.
So I am currently in sunny, well, I was going to say sunny Scotland, but not, that's a lie. We're in autumnal Scotland now, which means it is pouring with rain constantly. But still, lovely, lovely Scotland.
Right. And I'm wondering where your interest in conservation and zoos really comes from. So give us the first volume of the Jack story.
So I suppose starting from when I was really, really young, I was the type of kid that my mum got a zoo membership. We were there every week, running around up and down, doing all sorts of stuff, learning about animals. When I'd come home, I'd watch documentaries. I'd watch the David Attenboroughs, the Steve Irwins, all that sort of stuff on TV, fall in love with all that. And then over time, just fell more and more in love with nature and animals and plants and all sorts of stuff. Which I think is kind of the classic beginnings, where it's kind of laid, the concrete and the foundations are laid when you're young through that sort of thing. But then you kind of push it down and as you get older, because you think, I have to do a proper, quote, air quotes, proper career. I have to do something that's kind of going to make lots of money and do that in the next thing. So I kind of pushed that down when I went through school. But I always kind of had that love simmering away in the background. And then, more recently, I kind of went, I don't want to sit in an office all day in the last few years, and went, what am I going to do? I'm going to pursue conservation because it's what I love. I think it's one of the most important things that we all can be taking part in and doing. And that's kind of very brief and very fast run through, but there's more details I'm sure we can get into throughout that story.
Well, what are you doing to pay the bills? That's really where the question comes, because so many people in conservation, excuse me, have to do something else, and conservation is a hobby, or it's like they're volunteering or whatnot on weekends or in their holidays. So how are you pulling in the big bucks?
Big bucks may be a stretch. So no, when I started, I kind of started throughout my undergraduate degree at uni, I worked in an aquarium, and that's kind of where the love started to resurface, because I was studying international relations and politics. So it was kind of simmering away in the background, and I was kind of looking where I could at animal rights law, or kind of the international treatment of animals, or kind of different things like that. So I was kind of simmering away while also kind of working in an aquarium to pay for that university experience. And so that's kind of how I was earning the money then. And then more recently kind of went and did a master's. And during that, I was kind of working in an ice cream shop. So not always conservation related. And now I have a kind of part-time deal with the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland. I work in their discovery and learning team. So at Edinburgh Zoo, I kind of whenever, the way I like to describe it to people is basically when they ever need an extra person to come and talk about animals, that's me. I can come in at short notice and kind of deliver talks or run education sessions or whatever it is with them. I also have been working with the Royal Botanic Garden in Edinburgh as a learning technologist. So kind of talking about how you can communicate conservation through different online means, especially during the pandemic. That became super relevant because obviously we couldn't do, the Royal Botanic Garden runs all sorts of education sessions from herbology to botanical art to kind of a master's program, all sorts of stuff going on, but none of that could happen in person. So it was a lot of converting all of that stuff into online content that people could access in a safe way from home, and still kind of grow to appreciate nature and conservation and that sort of stuff. And then looking forward, I am now kind of just left that role, and I'm now about to start a PhD. So for that, in conservation, so that for that I'll be getting a stipend that will help me survive. So never the big bucks, but always, I would say fair pay. And when you're doing what you love, I think I can take maybe slightly less than a certain careers might offer because I love it and I'm never having a bad time really. So yeah.
I don't think anyone who works in conservation or even working in sort of the earth sciences, anything that's biology, ecology, I don't think anybody is doing it for the bucks. But it would be nice if the bucks allowed people to actually buy a house or something, wouldn't it? So.
It would be, yeah. But you know, it's one of those ones where it's like I think that's the choice that I had to make. That when I finished my undergraduate degree, so that was in politics and things, I was like, I could go and get a role in some kind of civil service job or kind of work in an office somewhere or do whatever. But I was like, I would maybe be fine, happy. I'd get bored very quickly and just be done with it very fast. So I was like, no, I've got to stick in this. Went back and got a master's in conservation studies and then pursued this instead. And I have not regretted it one bit, no matter the maybe poor financial choices that some people may say I've made.
Well, it's interesting your educational choices lead me to make you the perfect person to ask this question, and it's really a statement, isn't it? But it's something that I believe, and I challenge people all the time when they talk about how hard it is or how do we make a difference or whatever. And every choice you make is a political choice, I believe. And so every time you go to the supermarket, every time you choose to watch a TV program on a network or anything like that, the things you choose to do either reinforce other people's choices or other people's views of the world. So you really need to nowadays be far less laissez-faire, I believe, about just how you exist, or else you're just part of the problem. And buying a T-shirt or, signing a petition kind of isn't enough when we're teetering on the edge with so many species and so many ecosystems. So do you reckon I'm too much of a bloody hard-ass bastard for taking that view?
No, I think I like to be quite like I'm trying to think. I would say I try not to be overly political in terms of because I believe like conservation can transcend political boundaries because it is an issue that faces everybody, whether they be here where I am in Scotland or where you are or where any of the listeners are. It transcends all of that. It transcends government. It is an issue that everybody should care about. However, the more that I sit in the kind of conservation space, the more I realize that we have to become actively politically involved. We have to not just kind of sit there and
hello YouTube,
think about
hi
things.
Twitch.
If you have an issue you care about, it does make sense.
If you put comments in, I'm here. I'll react. I'll respond
to your local member of parliament, or whether it be kind of turning up somewhere and protesting, whatever it is. I do think those are exceptionally valuable tools in the world of conservation. If it's not for you, I do think you can still make a difference by being at home, listening
Oh
to
no,
podcasts,
yeah,
educating yourself,
that
telling people things.
yeah, that's definitely not what I was saying. I don't think you all
Oh,
have to man the barricades. You don't have to go and lock yourself to a bulldozer or
no,
anything like that. Okay,
no.
that helps. That helps, but that is when it's almost too late, right? If you're
Mhm.
standing in front of the trees that are about to be felled or bulldozed, the the pressure should have happened years before, and it's
Mhm.
electoral pressure, and it's
Mhm.
it is writing the letters and making the phone calls to representatives and your council body
Mhm.
and going to the community protests and all the kind of stuff that helps sway decisions.
Mhm.
That's what I mean by being political. And then, for instance, if you care about like the the jungle creatures, well then you need to be trying to get rid of palm oil out of your
Mhm.
diet. Not for any bad things about palm oil, but because they are just it's cheaper to clear forest and establish a plantation than it is to reclaim land and establish a plantation. And we're finding this in Australia here with all no doubt you're well, you got nothing left to, left there to knock down, mate. But in what we're doing here is, you know, doing new developments like for wind farms,
Mhm.
knocking down rainforest it in a park to establish a wind farm. Why don't they do it on private land that's already been cleared? Because guess what? You got to pay compensation, right?
Mhm.
But if it's on government land, they're not paying compensation to themselves. So it's all just about money. It's rubbish. But you have to be informed. You can be political just by being informed, I reckon,
Mhm.
because that prompts you to take action.
Mhm. And it's those little thoughts that come into your mind when you're in the voting booth or when you're in the. If you've learned all these things and you know about them, then you will make more informed choices at every level. So yeah, I think yeah, just by being informed and out there, and yeah, I think hopefully.
I guess half the problem is that you can make your electoral choices, and it's usually between shit and less shit. You're right. Oh, what's happening? What's happening, fellas? Are you still hearing me? I've just stopped Jack just to see whether it's my internet. It looks like it might be. Gee, it's been awful the last couple of days, hasn't it? Just let me know if you're still hearing me, if I haven't frozen for you. Um, let's start that up again and see whether you get it back. Um, oh, it certainly looks like it. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Buffering. That's better. Don't know what's causing it. Um, okay, I'm getting a comment, so we're obviously still going. It's something with you can hear me though, Naomi. Can you still see the ticker on going across the bottom on the screen? Um, let's see, maybe. can go. 1509. Let me. Oh, there we go. I think we're back.
It's like, okay. I don't know.
Thanks, Naomi. I don't know what happened there with YouTube hanging up. Anyway.
It was one of those ones this morning. I woke up and went into the living room and the news was on. And I just was like, I can't see this today. I know I don't need to see this. I know it's going to be chaos because it's all about Liz Truss and the new government of the UK. I'm like, I don't need that right now. I'll deal with it. I'll deal with you later. I'm going to do this podcast right now.
I had to giggle because I was, doom scrolling on Twitter this morning. I'm always looking for the good news stories, and like you get one against 100 bits of shit. But I did like the thing where Liz Truss, someone had done a summary of what she's going to do: less taxes and nuclear. All right, you guys are powering ahead now. Crazy, but before we get on to pangolins, tell me. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop this and let everything catch up. Naomi, you're still getting buffering, are you? And I'm just going to remove that from the stream and just see if it makes any difference. So the ticker's still going, so that's working. That's good. On the YouTube, are we having the people watching on YouTube? Are we having the same issues? So I pop Jack back like that. We've got a Twitch too, so we'll just hopefully it's caught up by now. Let's see. Hard to get an idea of it from just reading Twitter feeds or doing like a YouTube search or something, but rewilding as a movement in the UK, how big is that becoming, and is it actually becoming significant? Like, is it adding significant hectares or acres to the national estate again? And by national estate, I don't mean the Queenslands or anything. For the newcomers, Jack Baker runs a podcast, hosts a podcast, two actually, the Pangolin podcast, and also one called Re-Zoo, where he reviews zoos, Re-Zoo, and he's based in Scotland, so we're talking about conservation in the UK. He's worked, he got his start really in conservation as working in an aquarium. He's also worked at, I think this is called the zoo, the Edinburgh Zoo, Edinburgh Zoo, and he's about to embark on a doctorate, a PhD. Really meaning that creating habitat again for wildlife.
I would say there's projects going on around the UK. I'm going to put a disclaimer that I am not the foremost expert in rewilding. Right. However, as a conservation engaged person, there are projects around the UK that are springing up that are attempting to rewild and regrow and wild areas that were previously very nature focused and over time have just become degraded and all sorts of things. And I do think it is becoming more and more part of the discourse. I think it is something that we need to look at more seriously. I think it's something we need to talk about more. And I think it's something we need to change the discussion around, because I think every time, so for example, there's a restoration forest project going on near me, which is basically planting seagrass in the River Forth to try and regenerate those. Projects like that, no one seems to care because it's under the sea. And then you get into projects like the Bison Project, which is taking place in Kent. People are really excited by that because it's a big kind of herbivore, interesting. People love a bison. It's exciting. But then sometimes when you take it that next step into kind of, should we discuss predators, perhaps large carnivores? Yeah. People are still very horrified by that idea. I would say on a kind of general level. But they would turn their heads and they'd be very upset if you were to suggest not protecting to the greatest extent tigers, say, or or lions or whatever it is, these predators that you find abroad. So I think there's this discussion that needs to be had where it's kind of like, we need to deal with our conservation issues at home before we start handing out rules and guidance to everybody else. And I think there's still that kind of nervousness and tentativeness around actually committing to things that would, like rewilding projects of predators, that would kind of, I don't know. Did you get what I'm trying to say there?
Totally, and it's a really difficult. Looks like it's happening again. Let's just get rid of that. I think. I'm still here. I don't know. I really don't know what's going on.
Just fell more and more in love with nature and animals and plants and all sorts of stuff, which I think is kind of the classic beginnings, where it's kind of laid, the concrete and the foundations are laid when you're young through that sort of thing. But then you kind of push it down, and as you get older, because you think, oh, I have to do a proper, quote, air quotes, proper career. I have to do something that's kind of going to make lots of money and do that in the next thing. So I kind of pushed that down when I went through school. But I always kind of had that love simmering away in the background. And then, more recently, I kind of went, I don't want to sit in an office all day in the last few years, and went, what am I going to do? Oh, I'm going to pursue conservation, because it's what I love. I think it's one of the most important things that we all can be taking part in and doing. And that's kind of very brief and very fast run through, but there's more details I'm sure we can get into throughout that story.
Well, what are you doing to pay the bills? That's really where the question comes, because so many people in conservation. Wow, that went back a long way, didn't it, Naomi? That's have weird. To do something else, and conservation is a hobby, or it's like they're volunteering or whatnot on weekends or in their holidays. So how are you pulling in the big bucks?
Big bucks may be a stretch. So no, when I started, I kind of started like throughout my undergraduate degree at uni, I worked in an aquarium, and that's kind of where the love started to resurface, because I was studying international relations and politics. So it was kind of simmering away in the background, and I was kind of looking where I could at animal rights law, or kind of the international treatment of animals, or kind of different things like that. So I was kind of simmering away while also kind of working in an aquarium to pay for that university experience. And so that's kind of how I was earning the money then. And then more recently kind of went and did a master's. And during that, I was kind of working in an ice cream shop. So not always conservation related. And now I have a kind of part-time deal with the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland. I work in their discovery and learning team. So at Edinburgh Zoo, I kind of, the way I like to describe it to people is basically when they ever need an extra person to come and talk about animals, that's me. I can come in at short notice and kind of deliver talks or run education sessions or whatever it is with them. I also have been working with the Royal Botanic Garden in Edinburgh as a learning technologist. So kind of talking about how you can communicate conservation through different online means, especially during the pandemic. That became super relevant, because obviously the Royal Botanic Garden runs all sorts of education sessions, from herbology to botanical art to kind of a master's program, all sorts of stuff going on, but none of that could happen in person. So it was a lot of converting all of that stuff into online content that people could access in a safe way from home, and still kind of grow to appreciate nature and conservation and that sort of stuff. And then looking forward, I am now kind of just left that role, and I'm now about to start a PhD. So for that, in conservation, for that I'll be getting a stipend that will help me survive. So never the big bucks, but always I would say fair pay, and when you're doing what you love, I think I can take maybe slightly less than a certain careers might offer because I love it and I'm never having a bad time really. So yeah,
I don't think anyone who works in conservation or even working in sort of the earth sciences, anything that's biology, ecology, I don't think anybody is doing it for the bucks. But it would be nice if the bucks allowed people to actually buy a house or something, wouldn't it? So,
it would be yeah, yeah. But it's one of those ones where it's like I think that's the choice that I had to make though when I finished my undergraduate degree. So that was in politics and things. I was like I could go and get a role in some kind of civil service job or kind of work in an office somewhere or do whatever. But I was like I would not. I would maybe be fine, happy. But I'd get bored very quickly and just be done with it very fast. So I was like, no, I've got to stick in this. Went back and got a master's in conservation studies and then pursued this instead. And I have not regretted it one bit, no matter the maybe poor financial choices that some people may say I've made.
well, it's interesting your educational choices. Lead me to make you the perfect person to ask this question, and it's really a statement, isn't it? But it's something that I believe, and I challenge people all the time when they talk about how hard it is, or how do we make a difference, or whatever. And every choice you make is a political choice, I believe. And so every time you go to the supermarket, every time you choose to watch a TV program on a network or anything like that, the things you choose to do either reinforce other people's choices or other people's views of the world. So you really need to nowadays be far less laissez-faire, I believe, about just how you exist, or else you're just part of the problem. And buying a T-shirt or signing a petition kind of isn't enough when we're teetering on the edge with so many species and so many ecosystems. So do you reckon I'm too much of a bloody hard-ass bastard for taking that view?
No, I think I like to be quite like I'm trying to think. I would say I try not to be overly political in terms of because I believe like conservation can transcend political boundaries because it is an issue that faces everybody, whether they be here where I am in Scotland or where you are or where any of the listeners are. It transcends all of that. It transcends government. It is an issue that everybody should care about. However, the more that I sit in the kind of conservation space, the more I realize that we have to
Oh my God.
become actively politically involved. We have
It's
to
never happened
not
before,
just
has it, Naomi?
sit there and
Weird.
think about things. If you have an issue you care about, it does make sense to have to pursue it, whether it be writing a letter to your local member of parliament or whether it be kind of turning up somewhere and protesting, whatever it is. I do think those are exceptionally valuable tools in the world of conservation. If it's not for you, I do think you can still make a difference by being at home, listening to podcasts, educating yourself, telling people things.
Yeah, that's definitely not what I was saying. I don't think you all have to man the barricades. You don't have to go and lock yourself to a bulldozer or anything like that. Okay.
No.
That helps. That helps, but that is when it's almost too late, right? If you're standing in front of the trees or about, I think it's stuck in a bit of a time loop, so I'm just going to jump it forward a little bit and see if that stops it. That's never happened before on any of those replays, so it's really weird. Okay, let's see how we go this time. I'm watching it's bringing up
being informed and out there, and I think hopefully.
I guess half the problem is that you can make your electoral choices, and it's usually between shit and less shit, right? So It's like, oh, I don't know. It gets a bit depressing, but
Yeah, it was one of those ones this morning. I woke up and went into the living room and the news was on, and I just was like, I can't see this today. I know I don't need to see this. I know it's going to be chaos because it's all about Liz Truss and the new government of the UK. I'm like, I don't need that right now. I don't. I'll deal with it. I'll deal with you later. I'm
Actually,
going to do this podcast right now.
I had to giggle because I was. We have heard all this, haven't we? So let's just pop another minute or two ahead.
I would say there's projects going on around the UK. I'm going to put a disclaimer that I am not the foremost expert
well,
in
yeah,
rewilding.
right.
However, as a conservation engaged person, there are projects around the UK that are springing up that are attempting to rewild and regrow and wild areas that were previously very nature focused and over time have just become degraded and all sorts of things. And I do think it is becoming more and more part of the discourse. I think it is something that we need to look at more seriously. I think it's something we need to talk about more. And I think it's something we need to change the discussion around, because I think every time, so for example, there's a restoration forest project going on near me, which is basically replanting seagrass in the River Forth to try and regenerate those. Projects like that, no one seems to care because it's under the sea. And then you get into projects like the Bison Project, which is taking place in Kent. People are really excited by that because it's a big kind of herbivore, interesting. People love a bison. It's exciting. But then sometimes when you take it that next step into kind of, oh, should we discuss predators, perhaps large carnivores? Yeah. People are still very horrified by that idea. I would say on a kind of general level. But they would turn their heads and they'd be very upset if you were to suggest not protecting to the greatest extent tigers, say, or or lions or whatever it is, these predators that you find abroad. So I think there's this discussion that needs to be had where it's kind of like, we need to deal with our conservation issues at home before we start handing out rules and guidance to everybody else. And I think there's still that kind of nervousness and tentativeness around actually committing to things that would, like rewilding projects of predators, that would kind of, I don't know. Do you get what I'm trying to say there?
Totally, and it's a really difficult thing, and it's kind of comes back to that thing about everything is political. The choices you make, and I don't mean they're party political, but everything you do is a choice and everything has an opportunity cost, and it might just be an opportunity cost in energy, if you, and the thing that frustrates me, a local example, is that every time there are charities or individuals who want to save all the street dogs in Bali, they raise a shitload of money, right? But try and find 20 grand to fence off an area or to purchase, 50 hectares of really valuable habitat here, and no one can find any money. But we're saving the street dogs of Bali, Yeah, okay. I'm not against saving the street dogs, but I don't understand why somebody sitting in Hawthorn, which is a affluent suburb in Melbourne, finds it easier to write a $500 check to save the street dogs in Bali than support a conservation project at home. Look, I get grumpy too with the World Wildlife Fund and all that stuff, which is great, but tigers, elephants in Thailand is a big one that's always on the TV here, and I'm thinking, hang on, what about the swift parrot? And that's what's behind me. After some habitat for the swift parrot, and they go, oh gee, no, but logging, really important industry, and that's it's just bullshit. It's not a big important industry in this country. We bloody wood chip nearly everything that we cut down. It's stupid.
Yeah, it's one of those things, I suppose, that's kind of, it's not to say you can't care about those things. It's to say, kind of, respect and look after, if you care about those things, you should also care about what's going on your doorstep, because it is
Definitely.
just as important, and it impacts the whole kind of world. It doesn't just impact you and your enjoyment. Oh, I don't see this bird when I go outside. That bird probably traveled up and down the country, or the plants that were around you could have been really important.
Or the world, you know.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the birds, you know, traverse maybe 60 or 70 countries in their journey over the year.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing too, which I think when you get older, you kind of think about these things a little bit more. But the conservation edicts, you know, that we say you must save these animals or these places in Africa or in South America or in Central America, Southeast Asia, wherever. These are countries that haven't developed. And then you got people sitting in their leather lounges going, isn't it terrible what they're doing in Sulawesi, dear? It's like, you know, fuck.
It's like, yeah.
Really?
I think here in the UK, our largest land carnivore is the badger, which, when you think about what used to be in Europe in terms of large predatory animals, and you kind of look around and you think, actually, yes, let's take stock. Let's stop shouting at everybody else to fix their problems, because there is still a chance we can stop the degradation of our own landscapes and protect those animals that are left and help reinvigorate other species. There's great projects going on. If you're considering donating to a charity, for example, in the UK, and you're interested in UK species, there's fascinating projects like around the Scottish wildcat going on that you can still protect.
And it's still there, but it's nearly gone. Right,
yeah.
I mean, there's the Bali dogs example again. Why wouldn't you want to be looking after the wildcats of Scotland before you were going to be sending money overseas to do something else? If you can afford to do both, great. But you know, the harriers and whatnot in the UK, you know, with. There's money to release pheasants, but there's no money to protect the wild birds, you know. Although I don't mean no money, but you know, there's still vilified species, and we're not going to solve the problems. It's just nice to be continually prodding and giving people something to think about. Now, I'm going to run through a couple of these slides. Let's start with this one.
Mm-hmm.
That's the distribution of pangolins around the world. Eight species, I think. Was it 8 or 9?
Mm-hmm. 8.
I think it's eight species. That's one of them.
Yep, that looks like a ground pangolin to me. Yes.
Tamix,
yeah.
yes. And I had to put the little one, the tree pangolin, in there. And I'm guessing that one of the reasons that you were worried about pangolins is because of this.
Yes. So,
and I'm going to let you speak to that.
Yes. So I guess just to give the listeners a little bit more of a background on me and what I do. Basically, during my master's in conservation, I as part of the kind of dissertation process, they said that we could do a non-conventional dissertation where it didn't have to be thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands words of writing. We could create a media portfolio or something a bit different. And so I thought I would absolutely love that. So I created a 6-episode podcast series all about the plight of the pangolin, this wonderful scaled creature that you saw on the slides there. Fantastically charismatic, wonderful little things, but something that is underappreciated by the general public and the people don't know about. And I was kind of instantly drawn to it, I think, especially during the pandemic, because we had basically there was this kind of rumor and speculation that coronavirus somehow jumped from pangolins to bats to some kind of relationship within a wet market. And then it was kind of all over the news that pangolins were this evil disease spreading thing, and then all of that sort of stuff going on. So I saw all this happening, fell in love with this interesting, bizarre creature, and wanted to write about it there. So created this series. It was marked, given back to me, and I had these 6 episodes kind of sitting there. So popped them up on streaming services. They did surprisingly well. And now I run Pangolin, the conservation podcast, which is about all animals and plants, anything that is underappreciated in the natural world, I think falls under this banner of a pangolin. They represent all of these underappreciated species to me. But back to the initial point, pangolins, they are incredibly important, charismatic, interesting animals. They are ecosystem engineers, which means they have huge impacts on the environments in which they live. They dig burrows, which kind of helps turn over soil. They control pests, they eat insects, and they are really, really important animals. But what also makes them unique and special, as you can see, is that they are covered in scales. They are the world's only scaly mammal, which is incredibly important for them. They curl up into a ball to protect themselves, a bit like you'd imagine an armadillo doing. They hide themselves away, but that does cause some issues for them. One of the main ones, the picture you showed there, being trafficking of the pangolin and its scales. The pangolin is in fact the most trafficked mammal in the world, and yet most people probably, if you showed them a picture, would have no idea what it was. The reason that it's trafficked is for, well, there's a number of reasons. Its meat and sometimes used in traditional foods. Its scales are sometimes used in traditional medicines. And it's kind of hunted, taken from the wild for that purpose. As you can imagine, curling up into a ball is very good for protecting you from a lion. But a person, when you curl up into a ball, can just come pluck you up,
pick you
and
up.
off they go.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Put you in the backpack.
Yeah. So it's this huge issue, and I wanted to kind of help raise awareness of that, but in a way that was responsible. I think when this is discussed, a lot of the time we say things like, China does this, or this country does this, and we brand things as kind of these, everybody in this country does this, and it's their fault, and when in fact that's not the case. There are a lot of reasons why people do things, and there are not everybody within a certain group of people does these things. So, for example, when people are taking pangolins for the wild for their scales, in some traditional kind of cultures in Africa, they'll take one maybe a year, one a month. They can be used as charms of good luck, bad luck in different areas. So by saying people in Africa are doing this and it's evil, well, you might not agree that they take these animals, but it's part of their culture. They take maybe one, and that is probably not unsustainable. And also in terms of when you then take it to China, people say wet markets do this and Chinese people do that, when in fact, no, not everybody in China partakes in these traditional medicines. And so it's about communicating that the scale of this issue is huge, but it's finding the right people to talk to about it and the right ways to get the message across.
Yeah, the rudimentary research that I did, Jack, seemed to indicate that pangolins in Africa are still exploited in a traditional manner, but that non-Africans are exploiting the traditional people and paying them more for pangolins to traffic and to harvest for scales than so the focus is moving away from the traditional uses with the jewelry and whatnot, and the totemic and status implications within the tribe as they modernize, and I mean it's one of their reliable sources of hard currency from outside. I couldn't see how they were being exploited in the subcontinent in India, but that they were being trafficked for for an Asian market, and it was, traditional bush food in Southeast Asia, and of course this export market, which is like we saw that big bin full of scales, because the highest value is in traditional medicine in China. Now, it's difficult to be critical of Chinese medicine if you're someone who is then going to say, oh, ginseng, I take ginseng for everything, Well, if it's okay for you to believe it, it's okay for the Chinese to believe it. But maybe we can find the whatever the substance is that's supposed to be working in pangolin scales and produce that artificially and still satisfy the need and the desire. Maybe, I don't know, but there's no effort that goes into that. Obviously, it's a highly valuable product if it could be marketed well. So where are all these whiz-bang marketers? They can sell chewing gum. Why can't they bloody sell a pangolin scale substitute?
It's an interesting one. I think that was the point of my whole podcast, and the endeavor that I wanted to go on was to kind of demystify and try and look at these things, because it's sorry, it's one of those things that it's transferable across species, across things, that because it's the same with rhino horn, tiger furs and bones, and all of these things happen. And that where you start sentencing, you're like, I had a very good point to make, and now it's spiraling. There was a reason I was going to say that, but all of these issues that happen to pangolin happen to all sorts of creatures, and across all of these different creatures, there are generalizations and things made that are quite nasty, or potentially just downright racist, or whatever it is. It's not ideal. And so that was the whole point of the podcast, was to kind of look into these kind of things and make us consider, in fact, actually, there are people behind these issues that we need to talk to as people. We can't just mystify them as this horrible villain. And like, for example, I talked to a friend who lives in Hong Kong. She has never partaken in in the pangolin trade. None of her family would know even where to go to begin looking for and it's painted as if you went to China or Hong Kong or wherever you went within Asia, you'd be able to find these things, and you'd walked into a market, and they'd be hanging there and all this, and it's just not the case. And so I think that's what the whole point of the series was to kind of start to demystify some of that stuff, and work it out and try and get people talking about it, I suppose.
I discovered your podcast really early on. I think probably I must have dipped into one of the first 6 because I first was looking for podcasts on conservation, and it came up, and you're producing a podcast, so you're probably aware that quite often you'll find all these podcasts that you really want to listen to, but you don't get around to listening to them all the time. And then the next time I dipped in, I saw that you were up to like number 30 or something, and that the focus had changed to be a much broader conservation focused shows. So before we talk about developing it past your first 6, tell me how you got the podcast bug. Like you've seen the opportunity to get assessed but also do a podcast. Is that how it was? Did you have this burning desire, this latent desire to make a podcast, and this was just an opportunity to do it?
So I was told many times that I should start something, or a podcast or a video or this or that or YouTube or whatever it is, because I just can't stop talking about animals. My friends would be like, oh, that's like interesting, but talk to a camera about it because we don't want to hear it anymore. And it makes sense, because it was like, it's something I enjoy doing. I enjoy meeting new people. I enjoy kind of talking to people. and I enjoy kind of creating new and interesting things, hearing new stories, all sorts of stuff. So I kind of had this idea for a creative project in my head already. And then this opportunity came along, and obviously when the opportunity was presented, I could have presented Pangolin as a video format. I could have presented it in all sorts of things. And when I was creating it, it was right at the start of the pandemic. We were all in lockdown. We were all kind of not able to go outside. And originally I had kind of thought about making maybe a short film or something along those lines, because I was due to go on a field trip to Namibia to kind of meet to do some field studies. And obviously that couldn't happen.
Didn't happen.
So
yeah.
no. So I kind of thought about that, and then that idea. Obviously, I wasn't going to be able to collect the visuals myself. I am quite when I go into like creative mode, I can be quite the like Steven Spielberg. Like I want this angle, and then I want that, and then I want this, and then that, and then this, and it has to be like this. And so I knew if I was to say to someone who was maybe in the country nicely, to be like, could you send me some footage of this, that, and the next thing?
It wouldn't be what you wanted.
It wouldn't be quite. I'd be like, okay, but could you go back and find another one of these incredibly rare animals and just get it from slightly? So I knew that was just gonna not work. My creative, I'm quite like, when it comes to things like that, I like to control what I put out and create and that sort of stuff. So I was like, no, that's not gonna happen. So I then went into kind of the creative mode of kind of going, well, everyone's stuck at home. Everyone is now familiar with Zoom and Teams and all of these sorts of formats. So, and I like to have long form conversations. So I think a podcast would perhaps be the best way to do it. I think stories that are kind of, I'm a rambler. A lot of conservationists, when you get them talking, they are ramblers. And so I like this idea of having a longer form kind of format. I could obviously record it as a video podcast, but I thought that would just add another layer of work. I think editing video adds a whole other layer of complication. So I went, we'll do an audio podcast. We'll create it. I've always loved listening to podcasts of all different types, whether it be about recaps of TV shows or kind of video games or nature or whatever it is. I've loved listening to them. I can do that. I can put them somewhere for free. They can be uploaded to Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all of these different websites for free. People will get them. And yeah, it just all kind of added up in a way that I was like, this is something I could do. And I now firmly believe anyone with a voice should be doing it. With someone with a perspective can put their voice out there and get it heard. I think it's something that's it's such a good, easy tool for anyone to get involved in, I think.
It's a really good way to build a tribe. And, you know, that all the marketers talk about that, but it's a really good way for fellow travelers to find each other and to share stories. I feel a little bit guilty in a way that it's taken me so long, you know, in the bird emergency journey to actually start talking to other podcasters about what they're doing, because I think we worry so much about format and how we do things. So I decided to start putting the conversations up, to stream them like we're doing now, because that's how I was recording because we were all doing remote stuff. So I was using the tool to have the conversations for the podcast. And I thought, well, but there's there's nearly 7 billion people who are never going to listen to a podcast, and about 2 billion of them are watching YouTube. So let's have a crack at that as well. And our field is really good because you don't need to be big to actually communicate and to get people to care, to be interested. And I mean, when we're looking for activists, which I think that's what we are, you need people to be dedicated to the cause, to make a choice, one of those political choices. It's good to be able to have more than 30 seconds or 60 seconds or a 3-minute spot on a lifestyle show on TV to try and explain an issue. So it's one of the reasons I really, really liked your podcast, that it was a long show. and that it delved into issues in depth rather than trying to cram everything into 15 minutes. Because, of course, podcasts have got to be 15 minutes long.
No.
I
I
might
try
just
and
say,
cap it at an hour every time.
Yeah.
I'd never make it. Never.
I tell people, look, it'll go for between 60 and 90 minutes, depends on how much we've got to say, and when we've run out of things to say, we'll stop. Yeah. I might just say, Jack, for those watching live, if you've got a question or a comment, you want to know something about pangolins, or you want to know something about the zoo education up at, although you're just about to finish up that one, aren't you?
So I'm keeping the zoo. So I've finished at the botanics in terms of like in the Royal Botanic Garden in terms of that role, but I kind of like, I'm always around the zoo. I'm always hovering around in the background, kind of doing hours here and there. So yeah, and I probably won't be giving that one up anytime soon. I like it too much, and it's good fun. And I always find when you work in conservation, sometimes when your little, whatever your main project is, even if you're working in your little side projects, those little side projects become fun things because you're like, oh, I like, these are my I'm still doing conservation stuff. It's just not necessarily sitting at a laptop all day doing this. It's like an extra like fun thing. So I don't think I'll be giving that up anytime soon.
Yeah, cool. Let's talk a bit about the guest list that you've had on the Pangolin podcast. It's one of the ones that stood out to me recently, and that Australians will probably know, is Deborah Tabart, who's been really visible in Australia about the plight of the koala. But tick off some of the other big names that you've had on the show.
So after I finished up that first series, I kind of thought about, as I said, conservation stories. The pangolin became a representative to me of anything that is underrepresented in the field of conservation, and whether that be a popular megafauna species that's kind of people don't know is going extinct, or whether it be a weird or strange little plant or whatever it is. I started reaching out to basically all of my conservation heroes and going, would you be on the podcast to talk about this? So I have had, yes, as you said, Deborah, talking about koalas. That was fantastic. Love that. I had Julian and Stephanie Fennessy from the Giraffe Conservation Foundation, who are working across Africa to protect giraffes. I've had Arnaud Debier from the Giant Armadillo and Giant Anteater Conservation Project. Patricia Medici from the Tapir Conservation, the IUCN Tapir Conservation Group. I've had big people, but aside from the kind of big, I would consider those like the big names in conservation. There's also people who like, for example, like Felix and Connor from the Chester Zoo Youth Board, who I've had on, who are kind of young up and coming conservationists who are exciting. I've had my friends, Jody. I've had my friend Tasnia, who works with street dogs in Bangladesh, on the podcast. I've had all of these people from all of these different avenues and walks of life, and different fields and different backgrounds and different stories. And yeah, it's really exciting because I get to talk to some really interesting people. And basically the podcast is just an excuse to email people I like and see if they want to talk to me.
Do you find that you get on a roll? Like, we're on a roughly similar production schedule, although I sometimes fall behind and then I'll bump up. I've got so many to release, but I find it really hard to write the descriptions and everything when I'm about to publish the episodes. Like, I'll do all the audio, all the fun stuff, and then you got to sit down and go and, be a copywriter for half an hour, and that holds me back. I started off by hardly even bothering, and then I went full into making a really big effort to write a really good description and everything.
My problem is when I have to read a description to the person I'm describing, where I'm like, I'm now joined by this person who's done this, that, and the next thing. And you can just see a lot of the time people don't like, they're proud of their achievements, but they don't like to sit there and have them all listed in front of them. Like, oh, yeah, this is why you're great. That's the awkward one for me.
I think that's generally true, isn't it? And I try not to do that traditional introduction. I'll just sort of say what they're doing now, and hopefully we'll draw everything out in the conversation. But when you're trying to attract new people, you have to do all that stuff when they're scrolling through the various podcasts and everything, and that's the bit I like least about it. And I like looking at the analytics though. Tell us about that. Do you go back and have a look at all your stats? Are you a stats nerd?
I try not to look at them too much, because I think if I look at them, I'll start worrying, oh, this isn't doing as well as it used to, or this didn't do what I wanted it to do. Like, and then I'll start, but so I look at them every so often, and I go in and see, and I just like to have a look. And it's not, I'm the ones that always stand out to me is when you put up an episode that you think is like every other episode. It's just as interesting, it's just as good, it's a guest that's really interesting and engaging, but for some reason it just clearly hits a nerve with people, and they get like, it gets double the number of listens, and you're kind of like, I don't know what I did, I don't know what the magic of that episode was, but people loved it. And that's always the ones that I'm like, I'm still trying to work out in terms of stats, like, how? What was the magic there? What was the word that I used in the description? What was what was it the guest said? What was the title that like really gripped people? Like, I never know, but it's always fun to see, and just
I don't try and work out any of that magic. I just like to see that it's either continuing to grow or hold steady. But I love filling in the map of all the countries where people are listening. That to me is exciting, where people aren't listening. And obviously it makes sense that, you know, so many countries in Africa, people just aren't they just aren't listening to podcasts all day. They're making a living there, or they don't have the infrastructure which allows them. I remember the first time I went to the Philippines, nobody was listening to podcasts because it would have cost them, you know, half a week's wages to listen to one of my podcasts because of how much data charges were for them. Facebook was free, but data was expensive. So it's one of the reasons why I continually dump stuff out on Facebook, because a large part of the world, Facebook is free, so they can use it. I'd love to never have anything to do with Facebook, but you know.
I like, it's that map of countries is always like strangely satisfying in a way, because it just goes to show that, oh, this little project that I have is actually making it's whether they've liked it or they've not liked it, it's given them something to think about. And I think I'm sitting about 85, 86 countries now that the podcast has been streamed in, and I'm kind of like, I've not traveled to that many countries in my life, and my voice has made it to more than I have, which is a nice kind of thought. And not just my voice, the voices of the people who I've had on the show as well, their stories have made it that far, which is always a nice thought as well, that it's gone around like that.
You'll never guess what I'm doing now.
You're looking at a list of whatever countries, aren't you, to see if it's more than 85. I would.
I need to change the date because it doesn't show me the whole lot. Let me change the date. Going back to here and run that. There we go. That's better. How many countries is it now? 104. Oh no, sorry, that's not. Where is it? I don't think I've got as many as you. Oh, I've nearly filled in all of South America now, though. So that's great. 81. I'm on 81 countries now, so that's pretty cool.
It is, and it's nice. It's just a nice thing to know that you're kind of getting that far, or getting whatever it is. Especially because the scope of the podcast is global. It's nice to think that me sat in Scotland I was talking to somebody from Brazil, and somebody in, I don't know, Canada listened to it, or that I was talking to someone from Namibia and someone in Hong Kong or China was listening. Like Hong Kong was listening to. It's just this weird thing where I'm like, these global connections that it allows you to make is really, really exciting. Really, really interesting.
One of the things that I love about the stats is I don't know if you can actually see where in the country people are listening. So I love to go and have a look and, see that, in Finland, they're actually listening in a few places. It's not just
it's not the one
Helsinki.
person.
Yeah. Although I do have, like, for some countries, it's only one or two people listen to every episode. So you think, yeah, good on you. If I go and have a look at the episode, how many for that country? Yeah, one. Good. They're still hanging on. That's good.
Yeah, whoever is my listener in Greece, if you're listening to this, I am very grateful for you, because I see every week it's like one person in Greece listens. I'm like, yes.
Bloody ripper. And I know that there's people with a VPN listening in China, because I get feedback, people saying, oh yeah, I'm listening in China, and then I have a look at my stats and no one's listening in China. So they're using a VPN obviously to do it. Tell me, let's get back to conservation issues for just a minute. From your perspective, what do you think are the most challenging conservation issues that we can actually do something about? I think there's some things that we can no longer change the outcomes, and that perhaps we need to focus on things that we can actually achieve. But that's sometimes a controversial view. So what do you think? Let's talk about your neck of the woods. Let's talk about Scotland.
Okay.
Because there's too much to talk about for the world. But let's talk about Scotland. What do you think is the number one conservation issue in Scotland, and can it be? I'm not going to say solved. Can it be arrested?
I think one of the biggest conservation issues from my perspective anyway, as an educator and someone who does conservation education, is that people don't know enough. And I think people are losing a connection to nature, which in turn means that they don't kind of create spaces around their homes that are nature suitable. They don't kind of really think about they don't really care enough, I think, is a huge issue. And I think trying to get people to reconnect with nature is a big kind of problem that we need to face and deal with, because even contradictions like, oh, I care about nature, I'm a vegan, but they then will wear all fast fashion. And you kind of think, okay, but let's kind of get thinking a bit more about all of those connections and kind of let's do that, or kind of conservation education in a way. Yeah, I think we just need to reconnect with nature. It's kind of and kind of think about what we're doing and how we can act in the most environmentally friendly way on an individual basis, I think is a big problem within Scotland. I also trying to think of things. I do think there is another thing that comes up into my mind and that I've been thinking about a lot, is that a lot of the time when discourse around conservation happens, it can be quite argumentative, and it can be quite, you're wrong, I'm right. When in reality, we're fighting for the same thing. There's just, you have differences of opinion. So I think that's another issue. And I see it a lot, even charities. There is a charity that comes to mind who I think their work is often fantastic, but will go for other charities. And I'm not going to put them on blast, but like they kind of go for other. And I think I think in the conservation space, we need to be more open to other people's ideas and more open to having a friendly, interesting debate and discourse rather than just shouting at each other around controversial issues would be another one that I think. So making sure people are educated and taught and kind of know that they should love nature and how they can love nature is one. And then also making sure that the discourse around conservation is positive and non-argumentative. I mean, it can be argumentative and good ideas can come out of arguments, but don't just turn into fights and pointless infighting.
I think people need to challenge each other, and especially about methodology and expenditures and bang for buck and all that kind of stuff. But you just raised one of the things which I find, as someone, you know, quite a bit older than you, that I'm really disappointed, and in some ways I feel like we're losing the battle, because NGOs are important, and nobody should take this statement that I'm going to make in a minute as being critical of anybody who is devoting their time and energy to achieve the outcomes that we all want. But in the last 50 years, and a lot of NGOs have become so big that they then become competitors for the dollar for projects. And I'm fairly traditional. It's not the NGOs' jobs to save the fucking world. It's the government's, right? But the governments have happily outsourced everything to the NGOs, and we've all sat back and let it happen because we feel good when we buy a raffle ticket for some fucking feel-good charity, excuse the French. But what we've done is allowed 30% to be hived off to the people doing the promotions. And then the rest of it is, you know, maybe not going to the highest profile or the highest priority conservation needs. But we've all happily sat back and felt good by giving while letting the government off the hook. And that's the big conundrum I always deal with, because no NGOs can actually stop destruction of habitat. Governments do that. But we're all expecting the NGOs to be putting the pressure on. But the governments have, I mean, again, I'm pushing out, generalizing, but a lot of governments give the NGOs pat on the head money. So the NGOs then are reliant on money coming in from government. So then they're not bashing the governments on the head, right? And we've allowed this environment to be created, and I don't know where we go from this, because Donor World, all the NGOs exist because of Donor World, right? And the people who run Donor World are the same people getting the tax benefits for creating jobs as they destroy habitat. Right? I don't know. I don't know what we do.
It's really tricky, because it's you look at it and you think you have a list of things on your website, government official, that you support, or you do this or you do that. But at the same time, in one hand, you do this and you say you do that and this, and then in the other hand, you're in the position to fix a lot of the problems that these groups or projects that you're supporting, but you don't do it. And it's muddied and it's tricky, and I don't know. I'm glad that it is perhaps not my role to go between these organizations and try and work this out, because I have no idea where you would even begin to start to unpick that ball. It's so
I don't know what the solutions are. I'm not existing in that world, but it's frustrating to think that probably 3 or 4 people across the planet could give away 0.00001% of their net worth and really make a difference by giving it to on the ground bodies. But everything's a PR game, and that again dilutes every dollar, and just like here in Australia, I don't know if it was news in Britain. Did you get the thing about reanimating the Tasmanian tiger, the thylacine, the Hemsworth brothers? Fuck off, Hemsworth. Fair income. If you actually give a shit, just fucking buy some land to stop them wrecking all the habitat in Tasmania for swift parrot nesting, and then buy some land in New South Wales and Victoria, which is where the Regent honeyeater and the swift parrot go to feed when they migrate. I mean, fuck, it's not rocket science, but that won't get you on the news. But, you know, buddy,
if I see one more billionaire go to space, I'm going to lose my mind.
Don't even start me with that. I mean, bloody, you know, for a fraction of what they're spending on going to Mars, they could fix up a lot of these bloody things. Oh, it's just a frustrating thing, isn't it? See, here's grumpy old man coming out again. I just and PR, the greenwashing and the astroturfing that goes on with feel-good messages in conservation, where I'm not sure a lot of things that are being done that are getting, there's good visuals and it gets run on various TV shows. I don't know whether they're evidence-based projects, you know. There's just so many of them, and I don't know. So is Scotland doing well? That's
I think we
actually let me tease that out, because Scotland's got its own parliament. It's part of the UK, runs its own budget, has its own issues, but, you know, ran its own COVID lockdown policies and all that kind of stuff. So it's devolved quite a bit, but does it run its own conservation policies? And give us an idea of how conservation works in Scotland as part of the UK.
So I feel like the UK in general, there's certain things that are devolved powers. So for anyone who's not from the UK, Scotland very famously had an independence referendum. Has wanted to be, or large parts of the population have wanted to be independent. The government, who is currently sitting in Scotland, want to be independent. And so there is a lot of things that go on that are very detached from the UK, because we have our own little parliament that does its own things, and for certain facets of life, things like education, healthcare, we deal with on our own.
Broadly similar to Australia in that sense, in that we've got our state governments that run the state schools and run the hospitals and whatnot, but all the money comes from the feds, right?
And it's hard to say obviously there is issues with kind of there sometimes tends to be a little bit of the UK government says black, the Scottish government says white. The UK government says up, the Scottish government says down. There's sometimes a little bit of that goes on. But in terms of conservation in that world, I do think the Scottish government they're trying to shift to more kind of wind power. They're trying to create a more green, eco-friendly space, which I'm not entirely sure how well that's going down south, especially now given the UK. If you're listening to this in the future, the UK has currently just changed Prime Minister to Liz Truss, so who is kind of talking a lot about nuclear, and there's the fuel crisis and everything going on in the UK. So there's that kind of element. In terms of on the ground conservation, I don't know what the UK government projects or organisations that they have direct funding into. I know that, for example, the Scottish government helped support the Royal Botanic Garden where I worked, and so helped support projects such as kind of we have things abroad, but we also have things within Scotland. They're doing kind of translocations of different trees and kind of replanting and trying rewild and all sorts of projects like that that they do support. So it's comparing two very, very different approaches, I think, and I'm not entirely sure at this point where it all lands and who does what. And there is a lot of focus, I do think, on the charity side, as we were just discussing, of kind of the Royal Zoological Society is the one doing the project with wildcats. And they're also doing projects with the pine hoverfly and things. So I do think that, yeah, it's hard to sometimes say exactly what the Scottish or UK government is doing in terms of conservation.
I'm guessing that they're funding the main part of a lot of the projects, and that the like the Royal Zoological Society would be doing the stewardship, would be managing the project. But
no,
who
I
knows?
think it's a lot of it is independent work, I believe, for the Royal Zoological Society at least.
Well, then that highlights the point I was making before about the government's just outsource all the important stuff, which is so annoying. Let's be positive. Let's be positive. What's been a recent success in your part of the world, and then maybe if you can think of one in the UK that's been effective, well managed, positive outcomes, people are talking about it.
I would say, I don't know, I suppose within Scotland...
See, he had to think so long to find a success. That's part of the problem.
No, I think the projects that I would like to kind of highlight in success stories in Scotland would be, I'm going to bring it up again. I keep bringing it up because it's such a good story. Is the Wildcat project that's going on at the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland. They've had kittens born in a breeding facility as part of the kind of Saving Wildcats project that will hopefully one day be released back into the Scottish Highlands, which I think is exceptionally important and really exciting. I think also, though, something that they do that is kind of interesting and hugely successful that is not talked about enough because it is not a mammal, which I think often happens. There's that kind of bias. There's a pine hoverfly project, there's a very, very endangered species of hoverfly, which are found in Scotland, that they are helping to kind of breed and release. And that's had huge successes recently as well. I suppose...
Is that hoverfly a pollinator for the native pines? Is
Yes.
that why one of the reasons why it's important? Its ecological function.
It's one of those kind of little creatures that I think a lot of people would maybe swat away and go, ugh, gross, but actually is quite an important little thing for the ecosystems in which it exists. I also think generally, I feel like insects and all that sort of thing, this is a small tangent, but all of them, I think, provide a really important and interesting role, whether it be as kind of pollinators or as food for other larger animals or whatever it is that they do. I feel like we don't give them enough credit. So just a pause for a little bit of a ramble about that. I guess in the UK, the projects that I'm kind of thinking of, I think what's been exciting for me, certainly while I've been talking on the podcast this season, I've been talking to a lot of young people. And as I said, I think engaging young people and engaging people in general and educating them about conservation is so important. And I think something that's jumped out to me a lot recently is the wave of passion from lots of organizations to include young people. And that's happening up and down the UK. I think the Marine Conservation Society has a youth council now. I talk to people from the Lancashire Wildlife Trust have now got a youth council that's doing really important work. They spoke at COP. They are kind of making big waves. As I mentioned before, I've spoken to Connor and Felix from the Chester Zoo Youth Board. There's other ones up in Scotland to do with, and there's this wave of trying to get young people involved in conservation. And I think across the UK, that's such an important thing, because I think it's not that kids are the future, so they should have a voice. It's that kids have young people have excellent opinions, have excellent ideas, have excellent perspectives, and having them involved in conservation is exceptionally important. So I think that's something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, is that there is this kind of increasing young voice in conservation, which I find to be incredibly exciting. Because I think it's something that we need more of. We need more diverse voices in conservation. We need more people included in conservation. And I think if we get more young people involved in conservation now, they will be more inclined to love nature and want to protect nature throughout their entire lives because they have a stake in it. They've been involved throughout their whole lives and careers, and hopefully, yeah, that will lead to good things.
There's a couple of really impressive young bird people in the UK. Maya Craig, bird girl, and I can't remember his surname, but Dara, who wrote the children's book, which has they've been. I mean, they're always in my feeds. So I imagine that they are influencing a lot of people their own age. And then, of course, we've got Greta. You know, have you reached out to Greta for an interview?
I have not, and it was actually interesting to me. Like when you said her name, it's not that I don't. She's not a hero, but to me, there's so many heroes that aren't these ones that make it on the news now, which is so exciting. But like, she didn't even come into my radar for like mentioning because I feel like she goes without saying. But yes,
it does. It goes without saying, but it's also important that that we amplify all the other younger voices because it's important. You're younger than me, but they're younger than you, and I've been on this planet long enough that I'm pretty well set in my ways, and I've got my perspective, and I like it to be shaken and pushed around by hearing other people presenting their view of the world. And of course, we're sitting on opposite ends of the earth, and we view things based on what's happening outside of our front doors as well. And even though we're talking about conservation in a very local sense, we all need to be all doing it wherever we are at the same time, because it's counting down and it's getting urgent. We haven't even mentioned the obvious term, which is good, but everyone knows what it is, and a lot of our efforts will be completely wasted if the third rock from the sun becomes completely unlivable for mammalian and avian life, and that which I hate to be pessimist, but I'm not seeing a lot of fair income action happening over here. How do you feel? Like, I mean, I'm not thinking that Liz Truss is too tuned into it. How about the Scottish political body? Are they taking it seriously?
I think they're taking it seriously. I think they're thinking about it a lot more. I think recently the Green Party in Scotland has become a lot more influential. So I think that has helped in some ways. So I think there's a lot of thought in Scotland about it, whether actions will be taken swiftly or swift enough for, we can argue about when things need to be done by till we're blue in the face, but whether they whether it happens or not, I'm unsure, but we'll see. Hopefully we'll see how it goes.
As long as they start doing something, we can build on that. That's the way I look at it. I mean, there's a lot of disappointment about how rapidly the new government here looks to be addressing the need for change, but at least they pass something in the parliament, and then once that's bedded down, then the pressure can build to, build on that. So you've got to get, you can't put a roof on a house until you built the walls, right? So, but how about your heroes, Jack? Like, you've been interviewing lots and lots of people.
Yep.
Who stands out to you as a contemporary nowadays as really making a huge impact in their chosen conservation endeavours?
That's a
And
That's
you
a good
can't say
question.
all of them, right?
I know. That's the tricky thing is I'm too nice. I'm like, well, okay, so of of the people I've spoken to, I think some of the people who have impressed me, or like who have like their work just generally inspires me the most. Oh, that's a tricky one. Oh, you're putting me on the spot. Okay, I think that it's hard because I'm like, oh, who's okay. So I'm now rambling because I'm like, oh, think of
That's
someone, think of
okay.
someone, think of someone. I guess an animal that has
I'm gonna
always
I'm gonna make it easy for you.
okay.
You know why it's really hard to pick a winner?
Yeah.
It's because nearly all of these projects that looking through who you've been speaking to and having a look, I wasn't familiar with many of them. Uh, they're all making a real difference.
Mhm.
They're all kicking goals, as we
Mhm.
say here. You probably say it there. They're just different goals. We got big, tall goals. Uh, so there are so many heroes.
Mhm.
Uh,
I
it's
guess
and I hate using all the war language. They're warriors and they're winning the battle and all that.
mhm.
It's not a bloody war, but it is uh, it's certainly a quest for continued existence for so many of these animals.
Yeah, I guess for me, the way that was the thing that I was kind of thinking about is, and ever since I spoke to Arno Debier from the Giant Armadillo Conservation Project, he kind of phrased it well when I was talking to him. He was kind of talking about the fact that like he is maybe the face of it, and he's the one that I'm talking to at that moment in time. But a conservation hero is not just the person who is perhaps the person doing all of the interviews and the face of the project. It's all of the people who make the project go on behind the scenes. And I think that's
That's
what made
right.
it so tricky to pick one
Yeah,
because,
yeah.
yes, Deborah Tabart was so inspiring. Patricia Medici was so exciting, like to talk to and like inspiring and all of these things. But they are the front of an organization that has so many people working incredibly hard, and so many people doing incredible, amazing things. And so I wouldn't say that any of them are particularly like they're all heroes,
Yeah.
but you don't want to be like everyone's a hero. But
No,
all of the machines wouldn't function without all of the little bits
yeah.
within them.
Well, while you've been saying that, it brings to mind the Philippines Cockatoo project, which I um, was lucky enough to talk about. And while that's a husband and wife team that have set it up and have been the inspiration to get it going,
Mm-hmm.
they've turned poachers into people who guard the birds and the nest trees,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they've turned a big problem into an asset, and they raise funds to give these people a living wage so they don't have to poach animals. And so the heroes are the guys who have been prepared to change.
Mm-hmm.
In that it's not only Indira and her husband who are the heroes. It's all
Mm-hmm.
of these people locally who were willing to change the way they lived, and then they start to value something in a different way than they used to. They used
Mm-hmm.
to only value it as something they could trap and could flog in a market. Right?
Mm-hmm.
To people who were rare bird breeders, that
Mm-hmm.
um, that's a huge impact. So you you must be finding so many re-veg projects, protection projects where people are fencing off land and protecting remnant vegetation and whatnot. Everyone who bangs in a fence post is a
Mm-hmm.
hero, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and yeah, and without all of them, the projects wouldn't function. And it goes down to even the household level of if you are the person in your household who is going through the bins and making sure everything is recycled properly, or if you're the person who decided to plant interesting things in the garden or decided to make sustainable choices or whatever it is. I feel like anyone falls under this banner of an important figure in conservation, because you're by doing all of those little things and doing the tasks that people don't consider necessarily to be important to, or the most important things in the world, you're helping the thing function. Even people like kind of the admin staff who work in the offices, or the people who answer the phones, or the people like, they all do an important part of the process.
And anyone who volunteers is, to me, because they're giving up something tangible. They're giving up time with their family or their friends, or they're choosing not to do some other job, and they're doing a task that needs doing for no monetary reward. That's they're heroes too, mate. You can be a hero just by licking a stamp, you know.
And that's the thing. Giving up your time is the most valuable thing that you have. So if you use it wisely and use it in a way that kind of, I don't know. It's a really interesting one, I think.
Yeah. All right, now let's do the plugs for the show. Where can people find it? And actually, before we do the plugs, I haven't got to Rezoo. Rezoo, tell us about the offshoot.
Yes, so that is all. It's all under the same feed. So when you look for the podcast, just search for Pangolin, the conservation podcast, and it'll come up wherever it is. But Rezoo is a project that I started at the start of this year, and it is a series where myself and one of my friends, Jody, both have worked in collections for the last, I want to say, at least 8 years each. And in working in them, you start to realize these things, you start to look around, you start to be kind of not critical. You start to like see things and notice things, and you also get passionate about the conservation projects that go on behind the scenes of things like zoos and aquariums. And so we kind of had a chat, and I wanted to create a series which highlighted the important conservation work that zoos do, because I think they are often the targets for a lot of hate or criticism within the conservation space. And I think a lot of the criticisms are valid. I think a lot of the time zoos, in a world that was ideal, zoos should not have to exist. But we don't live in an ideal world. I think zoos still can provide a perfect and excellent tool for teaching people about nature, about inspiring people, about forming connections to nature. And I think they can also provide a lot of funds, a lot of successful breeding programs. They can provide all of these things that help conservation in a practical sense as well. And so we created Rezoo, with the Zoo Review podcast, which is basically, we go around zoos in the UK, hopefully internationally very, very soon, if possible. And we will walk around, we'll have a look at the kind of interpretation, so the signage, the educational stuff. We'll look at the kind of collection that they have. We'll talk about some of the animals they have. We talk about the conservation projects that go on behind the scenes. So we have kind of that series going on alongside the main interview series, which is Pangolin, where I interview the conservationists who work around the world. So it's an interesting project, and I really, really love it. Most recently, we did an episode on Bristol Zoo, which is here in the UK. Bristol Zoo is the 5th oldest zoo in the world. After Vienna, Paris, London, and Dublin, Bristol was the 5th. It's the only, I think they said, the only provincial zoo to make the top 5. And it recently closed. So we did an episode on that, where we kind of went through all of its conservation projects, went through its kind of history, and kind of chatted a bit about that. And so, yeah, it's another interesting kind of side project that I've got going on. Because, yeah, I can't stop. I talk too much. That's the problem.
But podcasts are like that, aren't they? I mean,
yeah.
There was a time where I was running 6 podcasts at once, and I loved it, but I didn't do much else.
That's why it all goes in the same feed, because it makes it easier for fans of conservation can go and listen to it because it's all there together. And it also makes it easier for me than having to work out statistics or publishing things across multiple platforms or doing that. I'm not doing any of that. That's too complicated. So it's all there. And yeah, if you are interested in that, or if you like, honestly, I think zoos, if you're a critic of zoos, have a listen to one of them, see if you like it, see if you don't like it, learn a bit more. If you like zoos, it's a good way to learn more about them. If you don't know enough about zoos, go and listen to it. I think what's important though is we always try to highlight collections and zoos that do good conservation work. There are zoos out there that are not good, that do need to be flagged as kind of they need to improve their ethics. But please know, if you're intrigued, that I do my very best to pick collections that do support conservation and do support animal welfare to the highest degree. And so, yeah, that's kind of the base level we look for. If we're not featuring a zoo for a specific reason, there will be a specific reason. And if you're nosy, you could probably message me and ask, oh, why haven't you done this one? And I'll say either we haven't got time or they're evil.
Or they might not. I mean, do you need them to cooperate, or do you just go and have a look around, or do you try and speak to them? And
in the main interview series, I have people on from different collections and zoos from around the world. I had David Field, who's the CEO of the Royal Zoological Society, on. I've had people from Bristol Zoo, from Chester Zoo, and all sorts of things. I've got kind of episodes planned with people from other collections, which I can't talk about right now. Highland Wildlife Park has been on, and so they kind of come on and they chat on those ones. Most of the time, it is just me and Jodie having a chat, and I don't feel that we need to let them know. It's to me, it's like going to see a movie. I don't need to let James Cameron know I'm going to go and watch Avatar and tell him about my opinions of it. But if they'd like to use it, or if they'd like to reach out and say, "Oh, why would you do this? Why would you say this?" I will gladly speak to them about it. But I don't think we're never overly critical. It's not me going in and being like, "You're terrible. This person's rude, and this person does that." It's not that. That's not the vibe. It's a fun, lighthearted.
That's not the point, is it? I mean, I can't remember what it was that I said, but something in my Twitter feed I made some reference about a zoo, and it started going off. People were saying zoos are bad shoes, and I was just thinking that as a kid, we've got it's now part of the Victorian zoos, Hillsville Sanctuary, but it started off as a private thing, and that was one of the most magical experiences of my life as a kid. The first time I went there, and that probably solidified my interest in animals and conservation and birds and habitat, because that was what it was communicating to kids. So my little brother got into monster trucks and prime movers and stuff like that, and I stuck with animals and birds the whole way. So you just got to win the battle. Oh, there we go, talking war again. One person at a time. How badly have we been socialized into using that language for I interviewed somebody for my show who was really, really concerned about setting up everything in conservation, about winners and losers and things about being a battle. And that was really the first time I'd thought about how every discussion about protecting an area becomes about winning and losing and war and battles and everything. But we're so socialized. It's almost, someone my age, it's really, really difficult to not just fall back on the same terms over and over and over again, even though my framing, when I think about it consciously, is quite different, But it's the only way it's presented to us. How do we change that, Jack? You're a young person. You tell me.
To be fair, I always think about this and the way that we use language and the way that we kind of are like, because that's what makes it, going back to something I said earlier about, we need to stop arguing with each other in non-constructive ways. The language that we use for conservation, that's like a base level for that. That's if you say we're fighting for this, or we're fighting for that, that automatically makes us want to have to fight for resources and for each other. And there is resources that need to be shared. There are things that need to go on. There are spaces that need to be occupied by multiple groups. But it doesn't mean we have to be at each other's throats, kind of shouting about.
And we
things.
don't need to push each other out either. That's the other thing. Just because someone's doing a good job, it doesn't mean that someone else can't do a good job together. At the same time, and that they can't all do it together as well.
And that's the thing that kind of linking this all back to zoos and the conversation we were having. I think that's the thing of like, if you have a problem with zoos, please speak to me, because I'd love to hear your opinion. Message me, chat to me about it. I'd love to hear it about why, because I think we are always learning and we're always growing, and when you work in a zoo, you work there because you love the animals, but that doesn't mean you notice every little thing that the public notice when they come in. So if you have a thing that you're like, oh, I didn't quite like that, raise it. Email someone, have a chat to someone, but don't shout at them, because I think when we start getting aggressive, that's when it starts to become.
Then they just go flag as spam.
Yeah. I have blocked several people on Twitter who have decided to shout at me about certain things. I'm like, I'm not. Go away. I would like to have a chat with you about these things, but don't just shout at me and be rude.
How about the people who leap into your Twitter feed to have an argument, and then when you block them, or sometimes I don't block, I just mute them, and I'm sure people do it to me. But I don't owe anyone any bloody right to free speech. Fuck off. If I don't like it, I'm not going to engage, and you don't have to listen to me either, it's amazing how people think that everyone owes them either a platform or everyone owes them some consideration for their views. And well, no, I don't. In most cases, I'm happy to listen. I'm all happy to have the conversation, and sometimes I'm happy to have the argument. But the only people who owe you the consideration are actually the people who love you and care about you, or are governing you, right? People who have got legal obligations to you. But if you want to shout and get angry about something, don't get angry about the zoo. Put your energy into the regulatory bodies, or to the people who dish out the funds, so that they actually have enough for what they need to do. And we also have to bear in mind too that there are zoos that are doing their best in countries where they have very meager resources, and we need to be a little bit understanding, because we might be in a worse off situation if that zoo doesn't exist, because there might be research or husbandry or breeding programs that just cease to happen, because we can't do everything in the best zoos in the world. We just don't have the people, the space, the resources. So we kind of have to be tolerant and be understanding that people need to develop as well.
And I do think that there is this kind of sometimes a very kind of Victorian picture of zoos painted, where they are just all cages with animals in them. And that's not the case anymore. That may be the case in some zoos that are run poorly in areas with less regulation. That might be the case. But the zoos that I support and I'd like to see develop and be able to continue their work are zoos that do genetic research that help support conservation projects. I've talked about the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland a lot today, because I work for them, and their project with wildcats. That wouldn't probably not be able to exist if it weren't for an organization like that. There's breeding programs within captivity that are helping to secure populations of a species that sometimes are, and they're sometimes released back out into the wild. So things like bison from the Highland Wildlife Park, I believe, have been released as part of programs.
Orange-bellied parrots in Australia.
They're all over the place. I think Przewalski's horse was extinct, near extinct in the wild.
Yep.
Per David's deer was near extinct in the wild. Again, there's all of these things that can be going on. They also help support kind of organizations. I know Edinburgh Zoo and Chester Zoo support ICAS, which is the project that Arno, the Giant Armadillo project I was talking about earlier. There's things like lemur projects that kind of rely on zoos, all of these
Yep.
things that
Yep.
go on. And I think for us to kind of say a blanket they can't exist is
No,
wrong.
it's and it ignores the science.
Mhm.
And we're on the cusp of a really exciting time with the developments in genetic analysis
Mhm.
and the ability for people to maintain good registers of the genetic diversity of
Mhm.
of of all of the captive populations of endangered species. I was going to say endangered taxa, but I thought I might sound too much like a scientist. Uh, and we're probably going to be able to do significantly more in terms of preserving the reservoir than the hit and miss kind of breeding and swapping of animals, trading of animals across the different zoos. But that's a really important part of the work that zoos do, that they do ensure that genetic diversity is kind of maintained, and that network of insurance populations is important.
Mhm.
My only problem with it is there's not much point having an insurance population if there's nowhere to put them. Once you've bred too many and we want to release them back into the wild, they've got to have somewhere to go. You know, there's no point breeding animals just to fill up another zoo. That to me seems dumb. But, you know.
Yeah. And that loops us all the way back to the beginning when we were talking about kind of caring for the environment and kind of individual level stuff. Like, and it's this big circle of kind of, if you care about animals and you wouldn't like to see them in zoos, make sure that you're acting in the most eco-friendly way possible, because unless you protect the environments in which they're found now, there will be nowhere left for them out there to go. So no, that's all very kind of an over dramatization of it. But by acting in an eco-friendly way, you can help to protect the environments in which these animals thrive by making sustainable choices when it comes to things like palm oil or other kind of crops that take up huge amounts of land or whatever it is. Making those choices can help ultimately reach your end goal. So we'll see. We'll just
Yeah, and it's frustrating that again, governments and industry want it all to be an individual problem. Everyone has to make a little effort to make a bit, whereas really the governments could just regulate and solve all these bloody issues if they were prepared to. Apart from imploring people to have a listen to Pangolin and Rezu or Rezu,
It's a great
however you
pun.
want to say,
A great pun.
I want to ask you a bit of a literary question, Jack.
Okay.
Actually, two questions. Actually, it'll end up being three. Have you read the Born Free trilogy?
I have not read the Born Free trilogy.
Oh, have you read the Gerald Durrell books?
I've read bits and pieces of them, but I need to. I'm
Come on,
failing
tell the
miserably.
truth. You've only watched the TV show, haven't you?
And what's the last one? I'm going to be shamed 3 for 3.
No.
I can feel it.
The last one should be, and actually, it's a really easy one because you can choose how you want to go. What's your favourite conservation / animal / bird podcast or book?
Okay, I'll give you what I'm reading now, and then I'll give you a podcast as well. I feel like there's two there that I can do. So, the book that I'm reading right now is The History of the World in 100 Animals, which is really interesting because it looks at the goes through human time, picks 100 animals that have had huge impacts on mankind. Each chapter is only a couple of pages long.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah,
it's good. I like it a lot, and the illustrations on the cover. It's just a beautiful, fantastic, wonderful book. And the podcast I would recommend if you love animals would be, I love Just the Zoo of Us. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people would know that already.
On my list.
It's good. If I'm looking to, if I'm going to big up my friends, I have to pick Wee Blue Dot, who Katie McFarlane I used to work with at an aquarium. She's fantastic. She is also Scottish, so if you like the Scottish accent, it's a great one to listen to. She had a fantastic range of guests on her podcast, Wee Blue Dot. I love that. Yeah, those would be kind of some recommendations that I had for different things. I'm trying to think anything else that I've been watching or listening or seeing at the recently. But I'm excited for Frozen Planet 2. That's apparently that should be interesting. But that's a David Attenborough one, so everyone's going to watch that anyway. Yeah.
It was very exciting. Did you see the David Attenborough one that had Daniela Teixeira as a guest? It was probably 2 series back, and I got very excited because Danny's been a guest on my show.
Running in the same circles as David Attenborough.
It's pretty funny because I share a house with someone who thinks all this podcasting shit is just bullshit. You know, what is it? Who cares? And we were watching it, and it was about the fires that we had in Kangaroo Island wiping out a huge part of the population and whatnot. And I just said, yeah, interviewed her she was on my show. And he went, really? Oh. All of a sudden I borrowed a bit of credibility. So, thanks, David. Cool. All right. Well, I think we've got a good podcast recommendation. We've got a book recommendation. When's your next show being released, Jack, and who's on it?
So yes, Pangolin the Conservation Podcast is coming out It comes out every week. We're taking a break in a little while because I'm about to start my PhD, but that just gives you time to catch up on everything. So the next episode should come out on Monday. Usually comes out on Mondays. The last episode was our tribute to Bristol Zoo, and the next one will be, I haven't decided yet. I've got a couple recorded, but the next one, there's a lot of stuff coming out soon. A couple episodes about primates, which are exciting, and there's a bunch of stuff going on. For people who are interested in birds, I'm trying to think back to episodes that I've done that are heavily bird related. We had somebody on recently from Conservation Nation who talked about her love of cassowaries. So if you're interested in birds, go back and listen to that.
Everyone loves a cassowary.
Just fantastic. It's a toss-up between them and Victoria Crown pigeons. They are probably my 2 favorites in terms of birds. Who else? Going back, all sorts of people that might be of interest to anyone who's interested in conservation. Go back, have a listen, have a look through. Deborah, if you're interested in Australian wildlife,
that's a really good episode, and particularly with the drama that we're facing in Australia now, with people thinking that we're going to lose the koala from two mainland states. Just terrible. I was going to recommend something else, Jack, but I can't remember what it was. I'm going to put the links, obviously, to the show in. What do we have to do on YouTube? Down below,
down there,
on the podcast page. And I remember what I was going to say, Jack. What's the premise of the PhD? Like, how broad can you be these days, or do you have to have a statement that you need to prove or disprove?
So the project is a collaboration between the University of Edinburgh and the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, and we'll be looking into the impact of living and preserved collections on the climate and biodiversity crises. So looking at how, using the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh as a case study, looking at how the plant collections, both living and preserved, that are held there, go up to do they make an actual difference to the climate and biodiversity crises? Are they being used effectively? How does our work impact things around the world? different things like that. So if you're interested in things like that, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm sure I'll be tweeting all sorts of opinions or thoughts or processes about that. So you can go and follow me there as well.
Jack, I've been tossing up whether to start like a plant/horticulture conservation focused show. I reckon I'm going to, and I reckon you're on the guest list. I reckon that might be it. That'll be a great one for herbarium geeks to get into.
I'll be excited. Yeah, it'll be good.
Better than preserving some specimens and getting your plant press out. And
it's an interesting one. And I never when I started at the garden, I was not a plant. I liked plants, but I didn't really appreciate them for everything they were. But the more you learn about them, the more charismatic and interesting and bizarre they are. So, yeah, really love them.
And how about now with the evidence from the time lapse photography and whatnot about them communicating together? That is amazing, And I've been a plant nerd, since I did horticulture, but that blew my mind. And now everyone just goes, oh yeah, plants talk to each other. Oh yeah, plants communicate. So, mind-blowing stuff. All right. Jack, it's time for your lunch, mate.
I know I was going to say that's worked out well for me. The timing's perfect. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been fantastic. And yeah, if anyone who's listening has any questions or anything at all, feel free to reach out to me. I'm probably easiest to get on Twitter at only Jack Baker or at Pangolin Podcast if they have any questions or anything they want to know about. Or find the podcast anywhere. Pangolin, the conservation podcast. I'll keep saying it. I even have my little mug. Look at that.
Oh, very good. I've been considering getting a mug. I just love my cockatoo mug so much. But
it's good. It's a strong one.
Yeah. If you like the conversations we have on the Bird Emergency, you are certainly going to enjoy the conversations that Jack has on his show, on both of his shows, because it's all about telling the stories and people trying to make a difference. Been great talking to you, Jack. Pleasure to meet you. Good luck with the PhD. Thanks for making a podcast.
Thank you for having me on. It's been fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
I'm Grant Williams. I'm a bird nerd. This has been the Bird Emergency. Ciao.
Bye.
My video starts. So, yeah, get a pack of chips or something happening, Joe. Get comfortable. Unmuted myself twice and it didn't work. I'm going to have to obviously restart the computer. There's some laggy stuff going on. So yeah, I can see that I'm a bit frozen there. Yeah, I'm not going to hang around now because I've got to have get some lunch into me before we do 12:30 with Holly and Maggie Watson and rodenticides, which so really about rodenticides, and there's a lot more powerful owl talk in that episode. So that's coming up shortly. And in that one, I was wearing a shirt with a collar on it, so I dressed up for the two eminent doctors. So thanks a bunch for being with me. I hope you enjoyed it. YouTube, Twitch, always nice to have you along. Naomi, always nice to have you along. And I hope you'll join us again shortly. I'm thinking now that I've upgraded the streaming hosting plan thing that I'm on, I think what I'm going to do maybe once or twice a week, I'm just going to start a stream at 10 a.m. and then I'll go and make my lunch and do it like I did before, hang out the washing and go to the loo. And I'm just going to run maybe 3 or 4 episodes, and perhaps the ones that are a bit related to each other. And then people can dip in and out all day. And because I'm really enjoying surfacing all these conversations that were made for the podcast, but, perfect to be running on the YouTube, the Twitch, and the Facebook, and even on I'm streaming them to Twitter as well. So people can find them, getting me inspired for a whole lot of new stuff this year, folks. What do you think of that idea of branching out, and apart from doing birds, spreading it out into animals and plants? I'm particularly interested in, like, we've got so many unique plants in Australia that are just on the edge, and our birds particularly have adapted to live with those plants, and we're losing them, especially in Western Australia and tropical Queensland. Would you be up for plant geek stuff? And maybe I'll run that in the habitat gardening feed rather than in the bird emergency feed. Just let me know if that's a good idea. And yeah, so we got about 15 minutes before we need to come back. And so yeah, if you're interested in plant stuff, let me know. I'll see you soon. Okay, ciao.